Good evening, and welcome to the Nocturnal Criminalist. On the morning of Thursday, February 19th, in Bristol, England, 16-year-old Becky Watts left her home like any other day. It was school holidays, and she had plans to meet up with her boyfriend. But Becky never reached her destination. 24 hours passed with no trace of her, and then, the worry truly began to set in. Hours turned into days, and the city's usual calm was shattered by the family's frantic search for answers, nowhere to be found. Social media exploded with messages responding to the Find Becky campaign. Hundreds of neighbors joined the search, organizing expeditions through every corner of the city, while police authorities called for specialist reinforcements to find the girl alive. For 12 days, the entire country followed the case through media coverage, but locating Becky seemed an impossible task. It was as if the earth had swallowed her whole. However, those involved in the search weren't willing to give up. Every minute counted. Finally, the search came to an end. Although the outcome was not what everyone had hoped for, hope transformed into horror in an instant. All the work they had done until then was just the tip of the iceberg. What had begun as a disappearance soon became a murder investigation, and a truth far darker and more twisted than they could have imagined would soon be revealed. From the very beginning, Becky's life. Darren loved Becky from the moment he saw her. Still, he continued to have doubts about his paternity and preferred to keep some distance for a while. However, Tanya forced him, under threat, to maintain a bond with the child. Otherwise, she would take away his ability to continue seeing Den. As Becky grew, Darren noticed she had physical and gestural similarities to him, so he eventually accepted his paternity, although he never made legal recognition. And for that reason, the girl didn't carry his last name. Tanya and Darren continued with the same custody arrangement they had applied to Den. But when Becky was 2 years old, she and her brother were placed in the care of social services because they were often dirty and disheveled. Their mother lost custody because she was not considered fit to care for the children. As a consequence of this, Darren had to fight authorities for months to gain full custody of Becky, as records didn't recognize her as his legitimate daughter. He managed to win the battle, and the children went to live with him. By then, Darren had reconnected with Angie, the woman he had always dreamed of being with. Angie, in turn, had a 15-year-old son named Nathan from a previous marriage. Nathan had been living with his grandmother since his parents' divorce because his mother didn't want him to witness the arguments this decision was causing. When Darren and Angie formalized their relationship by moving into the same house, Nathan chose to stay at his grandmother's house because he couldn't stand Darren, and was even less willing to live with other children. His mother respected his decision, on the condition that he visited them frequently. Despite disagreements, the new couple had managed to blend their families to live together as harmoniously as possible, although tensions and arguments were brief, subtle music, inevitable. When Nathan visited the house, he could maintain a good relationship with Den, but he couldn't stand Becky. He took every opportunity to say hurtful things to her. In fact, he was responsible for shattering the girl because of the harsh experiences she had to face from childhood. Becky developed a shy and reserved personality. She only showed her cheerful and fun side to those she trusted. She had a small but very close group of friends. The circumstances in which they had met had created an unbreakable bond. At school, she behaved like a quiet and responsible student, which made her very well liked by her teachers. But this wasn't replicated with her peers. When adults weren't supervising, Becky became the target of ridicule. Other children teased her about her body and her way of dressing. The pain those hurtful remarks caused her led her to stop eating and to have daily arguments with her family. For that reason, at age 12, she was diagnosed with anorexia and had to start treatment to combat the disease and regain the weight she had lost. Her entire family supported her in the process, except Nathan, who claimed it was just an act to get Angie's attention. On the other hand, Den had difficulty accepting his sister's condition and decided to go live with their mother. Becky had to continue her education at a special school that was prepared to receive children with illnesses who couldn't adhere to a conventional academic calendar because they had to attend medical appointments or prolonged treatments. It was at that institution where she met people who could understand what she was going through and finally managed to form a group of friends with whom she felt comfortable. After a long and complex process, Becky managed to recover. She was surrounded by people who supported her and showed her affection. She had started a relationship with a boy named Luke, and little by little, she was able to live a life like any other teenager. But on the afternoon of February 20th, Becky's father called the police to report his daughter's disappearance. 24 hours had passed since Ng had last seen her at home. Police authorities, led by Detective Richard O'Toole, arrived at the residence to find out from the family how the girl's movements had been before she was reported missing. On the night of the 18th, Becky had attended a party. Then, since it was too late, she announced that she would stay overnight at a friend's house and would return home as soon as she woke up. And so she did. Becky arrived home in the morning while her father was at work. The only one there was her stepmother, Ng. They chatted for a while. Then Becky went to take a shower, and Ng, who had recently been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, was preparing to go to a doctor's appointment. The woman left at 11:15 am. When she returned from the doctor's appointment in the evening, her son Nathan, her girlfriend Shauna, and her little granddaughter were waiting for her. She searched for Becky in all the rooms but didn't find her. Her son told her that earlier he had heard a slamming door and that it was probably Becky leaving the house. Her absence didn't surprise her at the time, as she often went out without needing to ask permission. That night Becky also didn't return for dinner, so her parents assumed she had stayed overnight at her friend's house again, taking advantage of the approaching end of the holidays. But on the afternoon of February 20th, the situation took an unexpected turn when Becky's friends shone. The police immediately began search operations. First, they used some internet platforms to circulate Becky's missing persons notice, showing her photo and some personal details. On the other hand, searches were organized throughout the city, and when they didn't yield the expected results, they extended to rural areas. Additionally, hundreds of neighbors joined as volunteers and began searching every corner to find her as soon as possible and, in the best-case scenario, alive. In parallel, family and friends launched a social media campaign under the hashtag #FindBecky, which quickly gained national reach. All of England was awaiting her return. Local and national media also provided space for the case's dissemination and covered every minute of the investigation. They also allowed Darren and Pat Watts, Becky's grandmother, to make a touching on-camera appeal 3 days after her disappearance was formalized. In it, her family expressed their concern and, assuming she had left home voluntarily, addressed Becky, asking her to return and promising her she wouldn't get into trouble. They also assured her that even if she couldn't see it, she was very loved by her family. Until that moment, it was believed that the girl might have left to escape family problems, but as the days passed and no news arrived, it began to be suspected that a third party might have harmed her. Her father, who knew her well, said it was impossible for her to spend so many days alone outside the home because she was extremely shy and eventually always needed the help of others. Darren said Becky didn't even dare to approach a cashier at the supermarket or ask for a bus ticket. That is why wherever she had to go, she did so by walking. 6 days after her disappearance, the investigation became more exhaustive. Although the searches never stopped, more drastic measures were necessary. On February 25th, local police asked the family to leave their home to conduct relevant forensic examinations in each of the rooms, but the search results were not as hopeful as they expected. There were no relevant clues there. On the other hand, they began to interrogate everyone who lived there or who had visited on February 19th. Darren and Ng declared once again everything they knew, but investigators were primarily interested in the testimonies of Nathan and Shauna because they had been in the house during the time Becky had left. Although it was difficult to coordinate a meeting with them, they eventually succeeded. Shauna said she had arrived at the Crown Hill house around 11:00 am. Then she went to the kitchen looking for a cigarette and went out to smoke in the garden. Her daughter accompanied her at all times. She added that she heard music coming from Becky's bedroom. After 15 or 20 minutes, she re-entered the house, washed her hands, and at that moment, heard loud footsteps that seemed to come from the stairs, followed by a slamming door. She assumed it was Becky leaving in a bad mood. What struck investigators was that every word Shauna said was accompanied by a smile, as if the situation was amusing to her. For his part, Nathan, who was in another room at the police station, narrated the same story with a nonchalant attitude. Every word was exactly the same as what his girlfriend had declared, despite not having been present at the scene and the agents not having told him anything about her testimony. That raised suspicions in Detective O'Toole because it seemed like a rehearsed speech. On February 27th, authorities called in the Major Crimes Unit and forces from neighboring towns to reinforce the search. Another search was carried out at Becky's home. On that occasion, the results of the procedure were alarming. Forensics found small bloodstains and fingerprints on the doorframe leading to Becky's bedroom. While the evidence was taken to the lab for examination, Nathan and Shauna had to face a second round of interrogations. This time, investigators used another strategy with the aim of exposing the lies the couple had previously told. Shauna was asked how her boyfriend was doing with everything his family was going through. The girl replied that Nathan was obviously affected, especially because his mother was suffering since Becky was like her own daughter. But when it was Nathan's turn, his statement was completely opposite. Becky's stepbrother confessed that he didn't have a close bond with the girl and that, in fact, he couldn't stand her because he didn't like the way she spoke to Angie. Investigators definitely had reason to suspect that Nathan and Shauna were trying to hide their involvement in Becky's disappearance. However, they didn't have the necessary proof to confirm it, at least not at that moment. But when the results of the tests found in Becky's bedroom arrived, they finally began to unravel the hidden secrets. On the afternoon of February 28th, Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hoare were arrested at their home. During the procedure, the smile on the suspect's face didn't disappear for a second. The couple remained locked in separate interrogation rooms while a search was carried out at their home. The procedure extended for 2 days due to the chaotic state of the property. All the rooms were filled with disordered objects that hindered the search for evidence. The upper floor was in the same condition, but there was one space that stood out from the rest. Strikingly, the bathtub was immaculate, as if it had been cleaned recently. Additionally, among all the clutter, officers found another crucial piece of evidence for the advancement of the investigation, a receipt from a hardware store dated February 20th. Thanks to the paper, investigators could confirm that they had bought gloves, a mask, and a circular saw, among other items. Security cameras at the store confirmed that it was Nathan who made the purchase. Although this evidence was important for the case, it also revealed a darker truth. From that moment on, the investigation ceased to be for disappearance and became for murder, despite not having found a body. The arrested couple remained in police custody the entire time, without receiving news of everything that was happening outside, much less of the advances in the investigation that had arisen from the search of their property. With this strategy, authorities sought to put pressure on them and encourage them to confess. And on March 20, they finally succeeded. After 10 p.m. that day, Nathan made a statement to the police through his lawyer. There, the 28-year-old admitted that he was guilty of having murdered his stepsister Becky Watts and also recounted what had happened. According to his confession, he and Shauna arrived at the house on Crown Hill around 11:00 am. In his car, he carried a large bag containing a sharp device, handcuffs, and tape. Minutes after arriving, Shauna went out to the garden to smoke a cigarette, and he went to the trunk of his car to execute the plan he had in mind. He intended to cover his face with a mask, kidnap Becky, and take her to a wooded area to scare her and teach her a lesson. The twisted plan had originated from the contempt he felt for his stepsister. Nathan had always considered her selfish and believed that the teenager's treatment of his mother Angie put her health at risk. Once he collected the items he needed to kidnap Becky, he went upstairs and knocked on the bedroom door where the girl was listening to music. When Becky opened, he lunged at her with the intention of subduing her, but his victim defended herself with all her might. In the struggle, the mask covering Nathan's face came off, revealing his identity. The aggressor panicked because he feared his stepsister would report him. Then he decided to take his plan to the extreme. Nathan strangled Becky while part of her body was already inside the bag he had brought with him. When his stepsister stopped breathing, he took her to the trunk of his car and stayed in the house for hours as if nothing had happened. The next day, after buying a circular saw, he dismembered the body in the bathtub of it. A year after the tragedy his family endured, Darren Galsworthy published a book titled Becky, The Heartbreaking Story of Becky to honor his daughter's memory. In it, he described the painful moments Becky had lived since her childhood and how she had managed to overcome them thanks to her strength and will to move forward. On the other hand, he exposed in detail the conflicts that Nathan's attitudes had caused in the family, conflicts that also involved Shauna. According to Darren's book, when Nathan introduced Shauna as his girlfriend, a big fight broke out, as she was then a 14-year-old minor and he was 22. From the first moment, Darren disapproved of the relationship and even ordered his stepson to end it or he would bring the birth certificate that would prove she was underage. Nathan hid their relationship for 2 years. After that time, he returned to his mother's and stepfather's house with a certificate proving she was 16, apparently an appropriate and legal age in England to be in a relationship. Darren had no choice but to accept Nathan's conditions. Besides, there wasn't much room for discussion either. The couple was expecting their first child. At the time of their convictions, Shauna was pregnant again. The case of Becky Watts caused a great commotion in England, especially among those who had been fortunate enough to know her. Her friends and teachers remember her as a quiet, compassionate, and kind young woman who had a great desire to live. Sadly, she had the misfortune of becoming the ideal target of two perverse and twisted minds. Once again, dear audience, I appreciate your company. Thank you for joining me in this new broadcast. Remember, you can follow me on social media. I am currently on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and also Spotify. If today's case seemed interesting and informative to you, I ask you to give me a like or a comment on tonight's broadcast. I bid you farewell, not without first thanking you for your company, and remember, if you haven't subscribed yet, I cordially invite you to do so and become part of this great community. This